Welcome to Indie Thinker with Reed Uberman. You're about to make the jump from the dishonest mainstream media into free and independent thought from key thought leaders on the subjects of culture, causes, politics, and faith. Metro World Child started in the heart of New York City's roughest areas and has grown to become the world's largest children's ministry, helping an estimated 250,000 kids around the world each week. Metro's leader and founder is a man named Bill Wilson. Bill is bold, outspoken, and even brash, but with good reason. After being abandoned on the street as a young boy and rescued by a man who later adopted him, he learned firsthand the difficulty children can face in America. After committing his life to Christ and his call, he moved to New York City at the peak of its deadliest crime wave to help the nation's most desperate children. As you listen to his blunt assessment of the modern-day church, the countless altercations he's endured while serving at Metro, including being stabbed multiple times, shot in the face, and even almost set on fire, you will also hear his tender heart for the forgotten children of our world. Well, Pastor Bill, in my own head, I call you the James Brown of the Christian world because you are by far the hardest working man in ministry that I know. Still driving that bus. You were shot by a sniper in 2017. You've been stabbed. You've been beat up. You even had a group of guys tried to light you on fire. So many things have happened to you in your tenure with Metro World Child. And right at the outset of this, I want to ask a question of you. Now, I'm running the risk of asking a stupid question because this is a question I know the answer to. But I do believe that in the answering of this question, it will be very, very beneficial to hear how you answer it to people. So here's the question. Is it worth it? And let me texture this just a little bit too, because I want people to know at home some of the stuff that you've seen. You've seen people who volunteer for you. A woman in particular who was dragged off the bus as she was going to pick up kids for Saturday Sunday school, and then beat up and raped and left on top of a roof naked and bleeding. You've seen the kids that you've sown so much into shot down, gunned down in the street. You've seen parents take the things that you give those kids that you've served so diligently, take those things and then sell them for drugs. So I know the obvious, easy answer, but when you take into account all that you've done and all that you've seen over your 40 years of ministry, is it worth it?
I'm not sure I could preach this from a pulpit because the folks that are less astute in their biblical knowledge would not get it. But let's go back to the four kinds of ground.
Yeah.
The parable of the four kinds of ground. Okay. All right. Thorny, stony, wayside, good ground. All right. My responsibility is not to try to differentiate or determine what kind of ground is out there. Because number one, I can't. Number two, it's not my place.
Yeah.
But to me, when you look at the seed that's been sown, take it from the parabolic standpoint from the Gospels, or take it from the ghetto standpoint right here in New York City. You've got 25%, 25%, one falls on the good ground. So you've got 1/4 of those illustrations where it's good ground, the seed takes root and grows. And I'm going to tell you something. And probably I'm one of the few people that can say this, so I'll share it with you. I've done this long enough to tell you that even by today's standards and all the hundreds of thousands, over 1 million now, of the people that I've worked with here, it's almost the same. It's 1 out of 4. 1 out of 4. Now, some people would say 1 out of 4, that's not, even though that's actually more than even Billy Graham had when he had his crusades, when they did the follow-up. But here's how I see it. That's not anything discouraging for me. What it is for me, it's a challenge for mass evangelism. Because if this 25% illustration seems to be characteristic of our cultures and societies, which it seems to be, then to me, we've got to get the gospel to as many people as we can. We've got to be in front of as many people as we can. I was on the street yesterday in Flushing, Queens. It's almost all Chinese. It's a very Chinese area there. And the line that we were preaching to, the crowd was almost as far as the eye can see. And that's not being evangelistic. That's me standing on the side of our sidewalk Sunday school trucks. You've seen the trucks.
Yep.
Where we cut the side of the truck out, side of the truck becomes a stage. So I'm standing on the stage. One of our Chinese girls is preaching. It's all happening. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, we're doing this. We're preaching outside on the street. I, of course, am not wearing a mask because I have the antibodies because I've already had the virus. So I'm out there. We've got Christmas on the street. And you know what? Nobody from the government stopped us. There were cops that drove by. There were people that walked by and looked. But my God, when they saw what was happening, when they saw how the people were responding, when they saw us meeting the needs of the people. It's like when we fed the 5,000 here a couple of weeks ago at Thanksgiving. Who in the world is going to look at that and say, you can't do it, or we're going to stop this? No matter what the mayor says, no matter what the governor says, in Jesus' name, we're going to do what we need to do to bring the gospel to whoever and whenever and however we're going to do it, no matter what anybody thinks. That's what the New Testament church has always been about. And that's what we still do. So when you look at, is it worth it?
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Yeah. When I was laid up here with the virus, I'm 72 years old. I'm in that kind of over the hill category. And when I got it, but we were working in one of the COVID hospitals here in Brooklyn where we were invited, where family members could not go in to see their own dying family members. And yet myself and a couple of our team were invited in. We had to put on all the protective PPE from the top to the boots. They wanted us to go in and pray with the doctors and the nurses and some of the patients. We were the ones invited in. We were the ones bringing food, feeding the second and third shift doctors and nurses. Why? Because we've been here, we paid the price, we've stayed with it. I pulled people out of burning buildings. Even when I was shot in the face in Brooklyn, for the first time I was shot, been shot twice. But that first time, even the gang members, right, not 2 blocks from where I'm sitting talking to you right now, said, Pastor Bill, we're with you. We'll protect you. You tell us. That comes from long-term tenacity to staying with it, of faithfulness. That's why you'll hear me say on television or when I preach, I leave tomorrow to go to Atlanta. I'm still preaching every weekend somewhere. I get on a plane, fight with all the getting on the plane, getting off the plane, but I'll be in Atlanta this Sunday. And one of the things I will say right out of the gate, your commitment has to be stronger than your emotions.
That's
now,
great.
You and I have been around just long enough to know most Christians live on emotion.
Yep.
It's all about how they feel. And this year has been the perfect illustration. I don't feel good. I don't feel like I'm afraid. He's not given us a spirit of fear, a sound mind.
That's right.
I was in Tulsa a couple of weeks ago, the faith capital of the United States.
Yep.
I saw more Christians walking around like zombies in Tulsa, Oklahoma, than I have almost anywhere else in the United States. Full of fear, walking in fear. Come on, folks. Come on. Wake up.
Well,
it's time for us to wake up and rise up. Is it worth it? Yes, it is. Because it's in times like this, when all hell is breaking loose. Everybody's scared to death. Churches closing down. We have no idea how many churches will close and will never reopen.
Yep.
But somebody had to say, as for me and my house, As for this ministry, we are doing more, even in this season, than we would have done before the pandemic ever hit. Is it worth it? Yes, it is. It's not up to me to decide the ground. It's up to me to plant the seed. Yes, it's worth it.
Yeah, I have no doubt you were going to answer it that way, but I'm also glad I asked it because everything you said right there, I think, is what people need to hear. So, I mean, I have an order of questions I want to ask you, but I got to jump into maybe the last question I was going to ask you because of what you just said. So, I want to ask you here in just a moment about what the state of things have been like in New York City, but I have to ask you about the state of the church. Because I'll be honest with you, one of the reasons that I started this podcast, I stepped away from the pulpit that I had and stepped into what I'm doing right now. I call it stepping into the culture, is because of what I was seeing happening in our world. If I were to be totally honest with you, Pastor Bill, I would tell you that it was also because of what I saw happening in the church. I saw church pastors not only falling, by the way, there was one that happened in your city, a big high-profile pastor who just recently did. But I saw multiple pastors fall. But I also saw quickly pastors saying things that they know that they're supposed to say rather than saying the truth. Just giving into the culture because they know that it's more important for them to win street cred than it is to actually speak the truth. And so my question to you prior to COVID, but certainly post-COVID, and I do believe, this is my personal opinion, but I think there's many that would agree with me, that you have the right among many to be able to speak to this. What do you see the state of the American church, the little C church, not the body of Christ, because the body of Christ, the big C church, is undefeatable. It will never be stopped, but the institutional church. What do you see as the future for the post-COVID church? Because I don't see many people like you anymore, Pastor Bill. Unfortunately, I'm a young man. I'm a millennial. I'm 39 years old, so I'm kind of like breaking the gate between millennials and Gen X. But I don't see many men like you anymore that say the things that you say. I almost feel, and I'm speaking about my own generation here, I almost feel like men like you are a dying breed. What do you think the future of the church looks like?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, your assessment is way too accurate. Don't forget now, at my age, and because when my mother left me on the street corner and the Christian man picked me up, you know the story.
Yep.
Anybody could have picked me up those 3 days that I was sitting on the street. But it was the Christian man who stopped. And he put something into motion in my life, sponsored me to go to that Sunday school camp that afternoon, gave my life to Christ, never been to church before in my life, but I went to that camp and boom, that was it. And I've never looked back.
Yeah.
But the part that I never get a chance to talk about is when the camp was over, I had nowhere to live. My mother never came back. So they cleaned out a maintenance closet in the church where the man who picked me up attended. So I lived in this broom closet for almost 3 years. I was 12 years old. I walked to school every day. My one meal a day was when I got home from school, and a different family every night would bring their leftovers. They would knock on the door. I'd come out and I'd sit on the floor and eat my one meal a day like a dog on the floor. I understand hard times, and I understand living by faith. I've lived by faith since I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
But now, as the years rolled by, and I saw the generational preachers, as you say, the old missionaries that paid the price, that weren't afraid to sell everything and walk away. Unfortunately, you get missionaries now, they'll go to the mission field for a month out of a year, they'll take some pictures, come back, get diarrhea, and think they're David Livingstone.
Yeah.
Okay? Our guys that are out there, they've sold everything. We all live right here. In this building, I'm talking to you, all of us. This is an old hospital that we've renovated. The interns live here. The full-time staff lives here. All the offices are here. We're all here, right in the middle of the proverbial hood,
Yeah.
as so many of the hip folks like to call it. And yet, remember, I've got a PhD. from the University of Wales. Not an honorary one, an earned one.
Oh, you
And
actually
I'm
went
now
to school and
working
did
on
it.
an MD, a
Yeah.
medical degree, because we are so much out in these parts of the world, from Africa to Philippines to India, where I had to have some medical training to be better prepared to
Right.
walk into these situations. So when you look at the late 1700s, the 1800s, maybe even into the very early 1900s, when you had men and women of God that really believed what they said and they lived it. They didn't just talk about it. They didn't get their sermons from other preachers online. They actually lived it. They understood history. And you and I both know, when you have an understanding of world events, understanding of history, your homiletic mindset begins to change. Your preaching, your communication skills develop at a whole different rate. And your level of commitment goes above and beyond what any of us could have ever asked. So the church today, where you've got preachers that wear $1,000 sneakers, okay? Does anybody need to own $1,000 pair of sneakers?
Yeah.
I don't think so. Not, I mean, my old beat up New Balances work fine. But again, it's a mindset
Yeah.
that has overwhelmed the ministerial culture today, where
Yeah.
now it's all about us. I will use this as an example, okay? I may not name names unless I get angry enough, and I'm pretty close to it right now. So there's no telling what I'm going to say.
Okay.
But you invited me, so you get what you get. I was with a older preacher years ago in Houston. Great missions guy, great preacher, great church. But when he passed off the scene, his son took that church over, and missions now has almost become an enigma
Right.
in that church. Why? Because now it's all about the local church. It's all about us. It's all about looking good. It's about saying the right things, as you said. It's about us trying to impress. I remember in the old days, we used to joke, as a Pentecostal guy, we always used to joke because the Pentecostal church was always on the wrong side of town.
Yeah.
And the goal of most Pentecostal preachers was to be on the other side of town and have a nice building like the Baptists. It
Yeah.
was kind of a running joke. Well, guess what? A lot of these guys have got what they wished for. They got what they wanted. And
Yep.
now it's all about reputation. It's about the size of the sign on the front. It's about appeasing the multitudes, not offending anybody. When was the last time? I'll ask you a question.
Sure.
When was the last time you heard a preacher get up and talk about hell from the pulpit on a Sunday morning?
Yeah, well, I think the obvious answer is maybe once in my entire life. But I think we need to step back, because I already hear my peers saying, well, are we going to honestly say that there's something wrong with the sign? Are we going to honestly say that we should be talking about hell all the time? No, but what I do think needs to be discussed is that, okay, even if we're to go as far as say, okay, $1,000 sneakers, there's nothing in the Bible that necessarily prohibits that. But the problem is that if we're going to do those things and then not stand up when the time is right, then we have to step back and question our priorities. For example, I never thought that I would hear, especially right now, and where we could really make a difference, where people are at home and they're hungry. I never thought I would hear a lot of the major popular preachers suggest that we should be looking at people based upon the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. I mean, this is something that Martin Luther King Jr. bled for and died for. Just this simple idea that people should be judged based upon their character. Well, you know what else? God says the same thing, that I don't look on the outward as man does. I look on the heart. And I've heard endless amounts of popular preachers talk about the fact that it isn't right to the black community to not look at people based upon their skin color. Well, I got to be honest. The way that I was raised is to look at somebody based upon their skin color is racism. And now we're being told by Christian pastors that that's the way we should be looking at people, rather than the content of people's character, the way God truly looks at people. So I just think it's interesting with the times that we're living in.
Yeah, and let me take that one step further, because we're talking about the condition of the church today and how it's devolved. And I think most people with any kind of historical understanding, whether you have a PhD like myself or not, who has a pretty clear understanding of the evolution of the church.
Yeah.
You want to talk about racism? When I moved here, I was the only white man that lived in this area for the first 15 years that I lived here. I am uniquely qualified to have a discussion about what real racism is. And
Yeah.
yet, as the pundits get on to talk about systemic racism, and yet in our country, people of all races, of all colors, have greater opportunity in the United States to do, to be, to accomplish than any other country in the world. It's a question that's not going to go away, but I think it's how does the church look at it?
Yeah.
How does the church see folks? Sunday morning is still probably the most segregated hour of the entire week. I live here in New York. I used to rent right 5 blocks from where I'm talking to you, a black Jamaican Baptist church. I rented it on Saturday to do Sunday school. And the only people that went there are black Jamaican Baptists. And it made no sense to me, because here you live in New York. It's such a tribal, segregated city. We just had lunch just a couple of hours ago. We were with this room where I'm speaking to you was full of Asian people. We have a tremendous Asian staff here because there's a big Asian community here. Okay, then you have the Russian community. Then you have the Hasidic Jews here, not too far from where we are down the street in Williamsburg. It's one of these interesting things that church folks don't like to talk about it, or their understanding of real people and how it works. It's just because they're not really out there. Most pastors, and correct me if I'm wrong, but pastors, as you and I have watched them, they spend most of their time sitting in an office all week, fiddling around with their computer. Very few of them get out on the street, get around the people, get a chance to connect relationally and really understand what's really happening, not what CNN supposedly is reporting.
Right.
When I was out there yesterday in Flushing, and I was there on the side of that truck, and I was watching one of our girls preach in Mandarin, and the people were coming up. And I've been to Asia quite a bit, so I can speak a little bit of a lot of languages. And just by the fact of me there, connecting with people, talking with people, and seeing how they're responding. When was the last time these popular preachers, whatever that means, that you referred to, when was the last time that some of them were out on the street talking to real people,
Yeah.
real folks that have real needs, that are looking for a church, not to just say they're a church, to be the church. No, there's nothing wrong with a big sign. There's nothing wrong with a big building. But you were right. When you say, when that becomes the priority, guess what? We've missed the whole thing by a mile.
Yeah, or maybe even not only a priority where it takes an inordinate amount of our attention.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The priority has to be evangelism. That's why the church exists.
All right, now can I ask you a question real quick and just interject, because here's what I hear in the back of my head, and we'll jump to another subject here in just a moment. But I hear in the back of my head somebody saying, "Well, Pastor Bill, the reason you're so passionate about this is because you're an evangelist. Now, what would you say to that?
I'm not an evangelist. I've been around evangelists. There are very few even evangelists that exist in the United States today because churches aren't interested in evangelism. Consequently, the title of evangelist really in America is almost an unheard phrase. It's not used anymore. It's not a title anymore. Now it's lead pastor or this, and we like little titles, and we like to segment and segregate everything into this, that. I wouldn't consider myself an evangelist. I have people that come here, they know I have way too much earned degrees. I'm way too educated.
Yeah.
And yet, when they come here, they say, Pastor Bill, can we see your PhD? Because most guys, when they haven't earned PhD, they'll frame it, hang it in their office. I said, sure, come with me on Saturday. Because my PhD, it's framed, but it's not hanging in my office. It's hanging in the Sunday school bus that I drive. Because the PhD did not teach me how to drive a Sunday school bus to pick up poor kids, to bring them here to teach them about Jesus. The PhD did not teach me to stand in the middle of the desert in Syria where a woman is holding her child who had his hand blown off when one of Bashar al-Assad's barrel bomb runs cut his hand off, and she's holding his hand. She went through the rubble of the bombing, found the little boy's hand, is holding it like this to me, and said, can you please help my boy? My PhD didn't teach me what to do there. My PhD didn't teach me how to feed 5,000 people 2 weeks ago for Thanksgiving. And my PhD did not teach me to get out on the street with a bunch of unsaved Chinese folks yesterday and do what we did. Is there a time for the PhD? Sure. But does it turn you into something? No, it does not.
Right.
It never. I have two homeless men that live under the Manhattan Bridge that have earned PhDs too, and they're homeless people.
Yeah, I've seen
So
it.
we like to put something out there that seems to be important, but in the light of eternity, you better figure out what's important and what isn't.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Before we get more people angry, I'm going to douse this fire a little bit, and
Just get warmed up.
I want to reverse course a little bit, and just because I want people to know the history of Metro World Child and what it is that you guys do. So I want us to step back from this passion, from this fire that you have. And from what you're doing, and I want to go all the way back to St. Pete and go back to that culvert where you were left alone, and I want to paint the picture for people what it is, not only that Metro World Child does, but why you're passionate about it.
Yeah, that's fine. And I think when people understand that when I was the child that was left on the street corner, anybody could have picked me up. This was 1960, sitting by myself in a corner, 12 years old. Anyone could have picked me up. A gang member could have picked me up. Drug dealer, pedophile, anyone could have picked me up. But the only one that stopped in those 3 days was the ordinary Christian who just happened to be on his way home from work, was going to the hospital to visit his dying son. His kid was dying of leukemia. And yet, in the middle of his own situation, of his own needs, he still stopped, got out of his car, walked across the street to where I'd been sitting, put his hand on my shoulder and just said, are you okay? That's it. So the 250,000 kids a week that Metro Sunday School has now become the largest Sunday school in the world. How did it happen? This is how it happened. One ordinary Christian, not a hotshot evangelist, not a hotshot popular preacher, not a hotshot anything, but a man out of his own needs that had every reason to keep on driving, just like everybody else had for those 3 days. And yet, stopped, said, are you okay? And I used to stutter really bad when I was little. It was horrible. And I tried to explain to him my mother was gone and I was just hungry. And immediately, he got me some food and water, brought me something to eat. He got on the phone. It was a payphone right there where I was. I was back in the days before cell phone, which some of you are getting this. You wouldn't even know a payphone if it slapped you in the head.
Yeah.
Okay? So he's on the payphone. A few hours later, he's loading me in a church van, sponsors me. It was $17.50 in those days to send a kid to a Sunday school camp. He didn't even have the $17.50. He had to borrow it. Got the money. Sponsored me to that camp. I heard the gospel for the first time. I'd never been to church, ever, in my whole life. I heard the gospel. I remember. The altar call was given. You want to give your life to Christ? I came to the front. Altar's packed with kids. And they all had a counselor. You know how we counsel and talk with people,
Yep.
leading them in the sinner's prayer, guiding them. So every kid that came to the front had a counselor praying with them, except me. I'm the only one sitting there by myself. It took me 2 days of asking people why, because I didn't know how to pray. I didn't know what to do. I never prayed. I asked why. And finally, one of the counselors told me 2 days later, you know why nobody prayed with me at the altar. See, I still had the same clothes on that they had picked me up off the street in because I didn't have any other clothes. I was sickly, scrawny. I still have a deformed rib cage right here because I had rickets from malnutrition.
Wow.
Nobody wanted to pray with the little poor boy. So nobody did. So I'm sitting at the front of the church and I heard the speaker on the microphone say, he said, just talk to Jesus. I thought, okay. I remember what I said all those years ago. I remember I said, Jesus, my mother doesn't want me. The church people don't want me. I said, but if you want me, here I am. And for the first time in my whole 12-year-old life, I felt like somebody loved me. And that night, at the front of that old chapel, something happened to the little poor boy. So what I have done with my entire adult life, I have tried to do for other kids that were just like me, to try to do the same thing for them. That's why I drive the bus. That's why I'll always drive the bus. Always. I'm 72. They told me, according to New York state law, in a few years, I won't be able to get the bus driver's license. People said, what are you going to do? Well, I guess I'll drive the bus without a license because I'll always drive the bus.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and if you come here sometime, you ride my bus, you may see it. Sometimes in the middle of the bus route on a Saturday morning, because our Sunday school is 6 days a week, my day's Saturday. Sometimes I'll just stop the bus for a second. I'll get out and I'll just stand outside the bus. And people wonder, why is he doing that? Because I was the kid on the outside. I was always on the outside. Always the outside. Always outside the camp.
Yeah.
So why do I drive the bus? Because every week when I drive the bus, now you know who I'm really picking up. People think it's, oh, Pastor Bill, he gets to drive the bus. And that's great. Yeah. But now you know who I'm really picking up.
Yeah.
I'm picking up myself. After all these years, I'm still picking up. It has nothing to do with the title. It has nothing to do with the PhD, the founder, the pastor of the world's biggest Sunday school. It's got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with knowing that if we don't do what we do, who?
Yeah.
Who? There aren't a lot of churches here in New York City.
Yeah.
Well, they like to do the music. They like to have smoke machines. They like, nothing wrong with that. But if that's the be all, do all, end all of what we think it takes to change a generation,
Yeah.
then we're missing it. It's about when you had that little boy, it wasn't that long ago before this pandemic, and he got on my bus, and I always kind of ruffled the hair of the boys, and I went to do this, and he went like this. You know why? You know why? And those kids that are so beat up, that are so abused, when I had that little boy on my bus, didn't want to get off the bus. Great little kid, little guy. I pulled up in front of his apartment building down on Broadway, right down the street. He wouldn't get off. I shut the bus off, went back, picked him up, carried him. He lived on the second floor. Before we got to his door, he just was screaming, crying. He said, Pastor Bill, please don't make me go home. I said, tell me why. And we sat on the stairs, and he lifted up his t-shirt, and the man that was living with his mother had taken a knife and carved the little boy's name in his stomach just a few days before. Still raw, still bloody, and he's looking at me. He's saying, I don't want to go home.
Yeah.
So you tell me, what kind of a title do you need to do something about that? You don't need a title. And you need to understand that the same Christ that shed his blood on the cross, the blood's never lost its power.
Yeah.
And it never will. And it's up to us as church folk, as church leaders, whatever that means in our culture, to realize it's not about being a hotshot anything. It's about having the heart. When Thomas, he couldn't understand the resurrection. Never made sense to him. It's too abstract. Until when? Until he touched the wounds in the body of Christ. And I want to ask every one of you today, when was the last time that you actually touched the wounds in the body of Christ?
Yeah.
To get out on the street, to see people, to hug them, even in the pandemic, even around. Yeah. When was the last time you saw what I just shared?
Yeah.
Come with me. I take people every year to the Philippines. I take 50 people from all over the world. Walk with me where the kids live in the garbage dump, where the families wait for the garbage truck to come in every day. Pick up the garbage. They have it's a Philippine version of McDonald's. It's called Jollibee. And they get the leftover food, recook it, and either eat it or sell it. They call it pug pug. When was the last time you sat and ate pug pug with some people? Because that's all they eat.
Right.
Sunday school in the North Cemetery. In the cemetery, you've got 1,000 squatters that live on top of the graves, on top of the tombs. They're squatters. They live there. We do Sunday school right there. Every 5 years, the people are allowed to break open the graves, pull the skeletons out, throw them on the ground so they can put another dead person in there. So these little kids, 3 generations, man, have lived in this cemetery. And you see those kids, and they're walking amongst the bones and the skulls of these dead people that have been pulled out of the tombs. And right in the middle of the North Cemetery, we do Sunday school. Come with me, walk with me, touch the wounds in the body of Christ. And I'm going to tell you something. When you do, it all changes, man.
Yeah. Well, I can't help but wonder if it would change people's perception of Christianity who are on the outside, who are not Christians, if they saw what the body of Christ is doing, rather than the things that sometimes make the headlines, which is the preachers with sneakers, because we all know really what the body of Christ is really all about, and it's about what you just said. Now, you mentioned the pandemic, so I do want to move to that because I think this is really important for people to hear. So obviously, You're a brash enough guy that it probably looks different in terms of what Metro World Child is doing. But I'm just wondering, because the biggest concern for me, obviously, I'm concerned with people getting sick, but I'm also concerned with the repercussions of some of this, of some of the lockdowns and the quarantines and stuff. And so you have the right, because you've seen it firsthand, to speak about nationally and internationally kind of what you've seen as a result of this pandemic and the effects of it. So I'd love to hear your experience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've not just seen it, I've lived in it. I
Yeah.
live here. This was just like 9/11 was disaster central. We lived through 9/11. We served on the ground with the fire department and all that 9/11. So I'm not the guy that just likes to talk about stuff. I live it. And once again, as all of you that are watching this know, that when this pandemic hit, New York, once again, was drama central.
Yeah.
You know, so many of these old people in the nursing homes died because the governor of New York put the COVID patients back in with the non-COVID patients. That's just a fact. It has nothing to do with politics. I've lived it. I live it. We worked at Wyckoff Hospital. I just talked to you a few minutes ago about that. Right down the street, not even 3/4 of a mile away from where I'm talking to you. And we would go there, and there was the 40-foot semi-refrigerator trucks where there was so many dead people. They'd put them in the orange body bags, and at night we would watch them fill up these 40-foot refrigerator trucks with the dead people. It's not a game. I'm very aware of it. I told you, I had the virus. And at 72, I knew I was in the high-risk category. But what it has done, instead of us pulling back and living again in fear, we are able to say, let us be the voice crying in the wilderness. Let us be the one that brings some hope. Let us be visible. And I would walk around Wyckoff Hospital at night, many times by myself. I'd get in the van, go down there, and just walk and pray. There was a man, he was literally on his face outside one of those refrigerator trucks with the dead bodies. And he's crying. He's just beside himself. And I sat on the sidewalk next to him. I said, what's wrong? He said, my wife is dead. She's in that truck. And I couldn't even tell her I loved her. I couldn't tell her goodbye because they wouldn't let people, even family members, go into the hospitals. And I talked to him. I said, look, I'm a preacher. I said, are you saved? Are you a Christian? He said, no, sir, I'm not. I said, this is the time. This is the time for you. There is hope in the midst of this. And I had a chance to lead him to the Lord right on the sidewalk. And because he asked me, he said, preacher, he said, my wife was a Christian. He said, when you get to heaven, could you find her and tell her that I loved her? I said, sir, now you prayed, you've accepted Christ. Now you can go find her yourself and you can tell her how much you love her.
Yeah.
And it was just the little things, just us being there, having a word in due season, praying with people on the street, going into the hospitals. But how did that happen? I'll tell you exactly how it happened. 40 years. It's taken me 40 years to be the overnight success here. I'm the last, and you hit it, I'm the last of a dying breed of preachers, not just in this country, but in this city, that have stayed and lived in the city. A lot of them live in Long Island, a lot of them live in Jersey. I've lived here for 40 years. I've earned the right to be heard. I've got the scars on my body to prove the longevity. And people watch that. People see that. I'm not just a white boy anymore that doesn't belong here like I was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, I'm Pastor Bill, who's been here, who's buried their family, who's done their weddings, who's pulled some of them out of burning buildings, who's gone to visit them in Rikers Island, the prison here in New York City. I went from the guy who didn't belong to the guy now, oh, that's Pastor Bill. I remember remember, Pastor Bill. I used to ride your bus
Yeah.
when I was a little boy, when I was a little girl, and hardly a week goes by without an email, without a phone call, without a letter from somebody somewhere who said, Pastor Bill, you probably won't remember me,
Yeah.
but I used to ride bus 42, and now I'm a youth pastor, or now I'm married and I'm raising a Christian family. I made a statement once when somebody asked me, what do these kids become? Do they become doctors, lawyers? I said, nope. And I made a statement. And I've never, I thought, when I said it, I thought, yeah, that was pretty good for off the top of my head. I said, I'm not nearly as interested in what these kids become as I am in what they do not become.
Mm.
And this whole ministry has been trying to build that rescue shop
Yeah.
right at the edge of hell.
Yeah.
That's what it's been. And that's what the church is designed to do. And in this pandemic, we have had that chance. Instead of cowering, instead of staying in the basement, instead of living in fear, we said, this is our chance to be the light, to take just a word, a hot meal to a nurse, praying with the doctors, going with the police department, going down to the precinct, encouraging them, helping the first responders,
Yeah.
being here when the world is in this whole city, the huge unsaved population, seeing us still on the front lines, still with our sidewalk Sunday school trucks out there. We became one of the 5 designated areas for food distribution in New York City. We were appointed by the city as one of the 5 major ones. We had the National Guard here helping us with distribution. How does that happen? Because
Yep.
we've earned the right.
Yep.
We've stayed. In the pandemic, that was our opportunity.
Yeah.
Just like 9/11 was our opportunity.
I love that.
And we're ready for whatever else comes our way.
All right. Well, I do have a question about that, and then I know you have to run because it's a busy time of the year for you. So, in your 40 years, hopefully everybody has heard this, and certainly you are uniquely qualified, I think, to answer this question. And I think it's important to hear people like you speak out or speak on the subject, because not only because you have that experience, but also because we need to hear other people's perspective. If we listen just to the elitist in the media, we will get one impression, and they actually really don't know what they're talking about. And you've got boots on the ground. You do. So if we listen to the media, we are told that the biggest problem facing minority communities, especially inner city, which are predominantly minority, the biggest issue facing them is, one, systemic racism and police brutality. I'm taken back to what Barack Obama himself said, which was this, that one of the biggest problems in the black community was fatherlessness, that in his own generation, he saw the number of single-parent homes double in the black community. Now, on the other hand, after that, you have Ta-Nehisi Coates writing basically a rebuke against this idea, in saying that essentially what you're doing when you say that there's problems inside these minorities communities that can be fixed, what you're essentially doing is you're victim blaming, and you're drudging up all of the past of oppression that has been brought upon people and all of that. And I'm brought back to Candace Owens, who said this at a hearing, where she said, if I had a list of 100 things to tell you that is facing black communities, white supremacy would not be on that list. And then she brought up 2 things. She talked about literacy and fatherlessness. I'm wondering, from your perspective, since you've been there for 40 years, boots on the ground, burying, carrying, perhaps even marrying, I don't know, for people in the inner city, and you've seen people live and be born and die. What do you feel like is perhaps some of the biggest issues right now that are facing minority communities?
I would have to agree with Candace and so many of the folks, even from the Black and Puerto Rican and Jamaican and all these other groups, Hispanic groups. I would have to say, not even so much in some of maybe the Russian community or the Jewish community. But I would totally agree with Candace of saying that literacy and fatherlessness is the issue. I mean, any guy can be a father,
Yeah.
but it takes a real man to be a husband.
Yeah.
And that's what separates the liars from the buyers. You look at these kids, and I'm going to tell you, because we've done some research on this, 70 to 73% of the kids that come to our Sunday school are fatherless.
Yeah.
Why do you think that I push to get men here as Sunday school teachers, get men on staff? Because as these young boys, especially the young black boys, it's a matriarchal society. The mothers, the grandmothers, the aunts, the school teachers are primarily women.
Yeah.
So the only interaction that a lot of these kids have with men is the police. So when they hear that you have to be afraid of them, I've gone through the NYPD tactical house myself. I was invited by the NYPD to go through one of the training rooms where the observers are above you. They put you in a scenario with a partner that you have to go through. I would dare anybody, I would dare you to go through a police training tactical house or do a ride with the cops and see how you have to constantly make split-second decisions. Does there need to be police reform? I think there can always be reform. I think there needs to be church reform. I think we need a Martin Luther again to take 95 more theses and nail them to a church door somewhere right here in the United States. Does there need to be reform? I think we always have to be open to change, always open to improvement, always open to reform. But as a guy that's earned his stripes on these streets for 40 years, I would challenge anybody to any sit down and say, okay, what are the problems? That's why I still drive the bus.
Yeah.
That's why we do Sunday school here. That's why I came here, was to reach a generation of kids that without the gospel, they're not going to make it. It is just that simple. And we like to talk about all the other things that we should be doing and be politically correct and say the right things. That's foolishness.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
It's
agreed.
foolishness. It's when the church becomes the church. Let the church be the church. When I was in 9/11, the only ones that I even felt comfortable working with that wasn't a scam was the Salvation Army. We work like this with the Salvation Army. And that's also the reason why the director of the Red Cross was fired 6 months after 9/11, because she was skimming off the top. So don't talk to me, folks. Wrong boy. I'm not your boy. I've lived here too long. I've seen too much. But when the church rises up and we partner together, we're in the process now of partnering together with churches that want to do something here in New York, but they have no encouragement. They don't have the resources. The Lord has blessed us with supporters, with people like you that have been behind us and support what we're doing. We have a child sponsorship program where people can sponsor a kid, in the Philippines and in India, but they can sponsor a kid right here in the ghetto. Come visit the child. For these kids that have never had an ice cream cone in their life, come sit with them, pray with them, let them know that somebody cares for them. That's what this is. And it's because of Christian people all over the world that believe and see what the church is supposed to be and see that we're trying to be that salt, that light here. They've gotten behind us. Now we're able to start working with so many of these other churches, like the pastor sitting right here in this chair right next to me. He said, Pastor Bill, we don't even know what to do. Can you help us? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can help you.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't want to go without you saying something about Kenya Critical, because not only have you been in the inner city in New York City helping hundreds of thousands of kids with a myriad of needs, not the least and the most important of which is their soul. But tell us what you're doing in Kenya.
It was last year when I was over there with the Metro team, because the great thing about what we do with the kids that have a sponsor in Kenya, they get a hot meal every day.
Mhm.
And without being dramatic, you'll understand because you know me,
Yeah.
is the greatest part of the sponsorship is that food. And for most of those kids, that food that they get through the sponsorship program, that's their food for the
Right.
day. That's it. And so we were just finishing Sunday school, and I saw one of the little boys get his little bowl of food, and he took a little bite, and then he took the bowl, put it on his shirt, folded his shirt over, and walked away. I thought, okay, that's strange. And I asked one of our staff, I said, what's up with that kid? And the staff member said, Pastor Bill, he's got 3 siblings back home. They're not sponsored. You knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
He was eating a little bit for himself, but then he was taking the rest of it home to try to feed his brothers and sisters. And that was last year, and that clicked with me. It clicked. And through this year, and for those that are listening, you know what's happened. There's been swarms of locusts that have decimated the crops there. The floods. I've got pictures of kids hanging from trees, dead, washed into a tree, killed in the flood. You've got COVID that's gone across the country. It's been a mess.
Yeah.
So this thing was burning in my bones. And I said, we've got to somehow, we've got to get at least some of these siblings that have not been sponsored. We've got to get them sponsored. They just brought me this. I guess you can see it.
Yeah.
These are the sponsorship packets that we use where the person gets a child, boy or girl, they're in Kenya, and it's a $33 a month commitment. They can be as involved in the life of the child as they choose to be. And so I called it Kenya Critical, because it's not just urgent anymore, it's critical.
Yeah.
Literally critical that we get these kids, particularly by the end of January. We've got to get these kids, as many as we can,
Yeah.
sponsored. This is a life and death, man. This
Yeah.
is a life and death. And I appreciate you asking me that, because we need help to make this happen.
Well, so for $1 a day, you can basically change the life of someone in Kenya.
$1 a day. It's 33 a month. And again, you get this packet, you pray for the kid, all the information of the child is in there. We have people for the kid's birthday. They do a little something extra. They send little notes and letters. We love you. We're praying for you. These kids have never heard that.
Yeah.
Never heard it from anybody. And so when one person, just like the man who picked me up off the street, why do you think every Christmas Eve I go back to that corner where I sat those 3 days, and this Christmas Eve, I'll do it again. I've been doing it for almost 35 years. I go back to the corner where my mother left me, and I sit there all night by myself. I've been criticized for doing that, mostly by Christians, of course. Why do you do that? Why do you do that? You're torturing yourself. No, you know why I'm doing that.
Yeah.
Because I never want to forget where I came from. That's where I came from. That's where I came from. I make phone calls. I wish people Merry Christmas. If I knew how to call you, I'd call you from the corner Christmas Eve and just wish you Merry Christmas. But that is what made the difference. And that man, he just passed away a couple months ago, because I spent Christmas Eve on the corner, and then I used to spend Christmas Day with him. He had dementia at the end. He couldn't talk. But him and I would just sit outside the nursing home all day, Christmas Day. We wouldn't talk. He couldn't talk. But he knew I was there. And sometimes, a little bit during the day, he would just put his hand on my leg. He knew I was there. That one man saw something in me that my own mother didn't see.
Yeah.
He saw it. And because that one man cared, 250,000 kids a week hear the story of Jesus. That's the reality
Yeah.
of what the light of the gospel and the purpose of the church really is. And it's because of folks like you, people that want to be a part That's what makes it happen.
Well, really, it's you, Pastor Bill, and because of you, you have shown other people that you can take tragedy and you can turn it into triumph, but also that you can be the difference maker. So thank you so much for that. Now, so we want to be difference makers. So tell us how we can get those packets for Kenya Critical.
The address, I guess, will come up on the screen, the website. I hope it does. You have to tell me. We can put the website, I guess,
So just go to the website and then you go to Kenya Critical.
metroworldchild.org, and we can go right on there, and there's a Kenya Critical link on there. They can go on, pick their sponsored child, and be involved. It's a great way. We've had people these last couple of weeks that are that's what they're doing in the name of their child. They're letting their child see that their kid can help to make a difference in a kid their age in another part of the world. So it's metroworldchild.org. Punch on there. They'll find the information of the sponsorship Kenya Critical, and whoever can help. It's a great way. And it's a great learning thing for other kids in the United States.
Awesome.
But the kids in this country are blessed.
Absolutely. Well, Pastor Bill, thank you so much for your time today. I know you've got a million other things to jump into, but thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you for everything you're doing for so many kids around the world.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for caring. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Honor is all mine. All right. Bye, everybody. Our thanks again to our guests for being on the show today. Indie Thinker with Reed Uberman was brought to you by our sponsors. If you like what you heard today, please do us a big favor and give it a 5-star review and like it and share it with friends. And if you want to hear more awesome guests, make sure to check out past episodes. Indie Thinker is a nonprofit paid for by our sponsors and the generous gifts of people like you. In order to hear more great guests like you did today, please consider giving a tax-deductible gift by going to indiethinker.org. And just remember, your voice matters, but infinitely more when you think for yourself.